Greetings and welcome to our virtual artist talk. This is the Thou Art Woman art exhibition with the theme and title Reimagine, Liberating Queer Futures. I'm G, I use she, her pronouns, and I'm the executive director of the nonprofit organization Blink, and we produce and present Thou Art Woman. Thou Art Woman is an art event series that uplifts, empowers, and connects LGBTQ women and allies. And we are excited to have this art exhibition at the Island Space Caribbean Museum which is located in the Broward Mall in Fort Lauderdale, Florida, United States of America. And we have with us Stephanie from the museum, and we'd love to hear from Stephanie, and wanted to share that we're just so grateful to have our show there, our exhibition there, and that the Island Space Caribbean Museum has been an outstanding ally, which is so needed, especially now.
Thank you for that, G. Again, my name is Stephanie. I'm the programming coordinator for Island Space Caribbean Museum. So Island Space is a Caribbean museum, as you might be able to tell, and we are actually the only Pan-Caribbean heritage museum in the entire United States. So what we do here is we celebrate Caribbean culture via different things. We have a museum with different artifacts from throughout the Caribbean that tell the history and the culture of the Caribbean. We have a gallery where we host lovely exhibitions like Thou Art Women, and we also host several events such as the opening reception and the closing reception for Thou Art Women that we'll have later on this year. We are so thrilled and excited to have this event here. We're very excited to host this incredible exhibit, and we're excited to share it with all of you. If you're a local or you're planning a visit soon, I do invite you to come visit the museum so that you can see both the archives and the exhibit in person. We are open Thursday through Sunday from 11 to 7, and we would love for you to visit. Again, we're thrilled to have this exhibit here because we feel that our mission is to be a very inclusive space and to make sure that everyone, no matter their background, feels welcome here. So thank you for choosing us as your partner for Thou Art Women. And I'm going to give it back to G.
Thank you so much, Stephanie. It really means a lot to us and our community that you're such strong allies and create such a welcoming space for us. So also want to thank our funders. We have been so fortunate to have funders come behind us and support our work over the years. We have the Our Fund Foundation, Community Foundation of Broward, Queer Mobilization Fund, the Miss Foundation for Women, World Centric, and for this exhibition, we also have FAB Funding Arts for Broward and Human Rights Campaign, also known as HRC. And then we also have community partners like Trans Inclusive Group and the Thinking Cap Theater and Sun Serve. So without these funders and supporters, we really wouldn't be able to do this, such vital programming. And then want to make sure everybody follows us. We're on Instagram, we're on Facebook. So follow Thou Art Woman, our program, THOU Art Woman on Instagram and on Facebook. You can like us. And we're also, our nonprofit organization, Blink, is on Instagram as Blink, BLINC.love, and also Facebook. And you could visit our website, which is also blink.love. And we had a fabulous opening, March 13th. Thanks to everybody who joined us there at the opening. Oh, we're going to get some footage from it. Great. Thank you for everybody for joining us. We actually had some artists come up from Jamaica. And this exhibition is our 6th annual exhibition and our first one to have such a broad reach. We have folks coming from Jamaica, from New York, California, Minnesota, Sri Lanka, and South Africa. So really grateful to have that international reach for this exhibition. And we have our closing on May 8th, 2025, back at the museum, Island Space Caribbean Museum. You can register right now on Eventbrite. So come back out. If you came, come back. And if you didn't, come on out and join us. It is free registration. We always have beautiful vibes, food, beautiful people, and of course, the art. And without further ado, let me introduce our curator. Our curator, Carrie Chen from Narrative Curatorial, has done such an excellent job for us. It's our first time working with her. We're really grateful to her. And so let me read a little of her bio and then we'll jump into the conversation. Carrie Chen is a curator, arts manager, and writer from Kingston, Jamaica. She studied economics at the University of West Indies before graduating as valedictorian with a BA in arts management and art history from the Edna Manley College of the Visual and Performing Arts. She's an alumna of the inaugural Jamaica Art Society and Contemporary Arts Writing Workshop facilitated by the National Gallery of Jamaica and the New Art School Modality Arts Writing About Art program at Hauser and Rith in New York City. Carrie, thank you so much for this amazing exhibition that you've curated for us here in Fort Lauderdale, Florida. And I say take it away. We look forward to a great conversation, a great panel discussion this evening.
Thanks for that, G. I also want to thank you. I want to thank the Art Woman and Blink for being open to expanding the reach of the exhibition. And I think it's really valuable to allow for artists from Jamaica and Sri Lanka who live in spaces where a lot of time expression is suppressed. I think that recognizing that we have an equal amount of artists from outside of America there, as we do in America in this particular exhibition. And I think that really says a lot. And I hope that Thou Art Woman continues to be a space for that supports, queer expressions in spaces otherwise hostile to that sort of
Yes.
expression. So
So
really want to thank you for that.
You're welcome. And that's why we exist. I want to make sure I acknowledge my co-founder, Nick Harris, who co-founded The Art Woman back in 2014, and also Blink, and also big up our board. And take it away, Carrie. Looking forward to
Thanks
the
again,
conversation.
G. I actually want to sort of ground the conversation in world building. And that's really why we reimagine, right? To conjure up alternative realities within which we get to construct a world that is friendly, a world that is accommodating to our particular needs, not just now, but in the future, one that is sustainable. And I really want to ground that within the work of scholar and activist Adrienne Marie Brown, who says, world building is a practice of creating spaces, temporalities, and epistemologies that defy dominant logics. It is a radical act of survival, particularly for those whose bodies and histories are rendered illegible by colonialism and heteropatriarchy. Thanks, Khalib. So effectively, I mean, Adrienne Marie Brown is talking about alternative ways of knowing and being in the world, and I'm really grounding this discussion within this particular approach. And at this time, I'd love to ask four of our exhibiting artists to introduce themselves in the order Amaryllis Ara, Rain Hansen, Neela Ebanks, and Barbara Caridad. I'm going to ask them to tell us where they're from, where they're located. I'd love for them to share about their creative practice generally. I am aware that most of these artists have expansive practices beyond the remit of what they've submitted for the show. So just share with us what your creative practice looks like generally, and then share about the work you've submitted for Reimagine and how it is that this particular piece that you've submitted and pieces for some of you are actually reimagining a future beyond this sort of colonial construct. Amaryllis, we'll start with you.
Hi, I'm Amaryllis Ara, and I'm from Manchester, Jamaica, but I currently live and work from Montego Bay. My work is largely based in research, multiple artistic forms, and workshop facilitation, which is usually based in gender-based activities. um, Decolonization is like a primary part of my practice, and it is not just a philosophical perspective to me, it's in everything I do. And I'm really committed to undoing the ways that I embody oppressive ideologies and supporting others in doing the same. So that's something that I strive to do within my practice. I definitely consider my work to be rooted in varying lineages that offer me the ability to express the things that I try to document or the things that I learn from living a life and experiencing one like with and through community. So the work that I have in this specific exhibition is Festa Key, which is a digital archive alter communication community initiative, and I also have a collage by the name of Ache, which is about reconciling the lineages that I'm from, which are Black Jamaican people, and varying other lineages that we just can't even find because or experiences are just not well documented, and the experience of being queer and Black in a country that just does not want me to exist. So yeah, I feel like that's all I have to say for now.
And I'm curious to know, how does Vesta Key respond to this approach to reimagining our futures or liberated futures as queer people?
Vesta Key exists to be a space to put grief that we don't really have in a general expectation, because when we talk about grief, it's something that people experience for like a small period of time. We might think that it's something that you get over after you come from like your 1 week or your couple days of like leave from work, and then you don't really have anywhere to put it. Vesta Key came from having many conversations with people within the queer community about disappearances and losses we've had from the community, and I found that a lot of people just didn't know what to do with it. I thought for a really long time that it was that nobody cared, or that nobody really, or we were all just numb or like overexposed to this experience of violence. And I found over time that people were just helpless, that they realized that they just didn't know what to do about it. And that's the thing, not to be an Afro pessimist about it, but that's the thing about living in a world like this. There is no real power you have but to just continue your day, or like to just continue your life. And I feel like it's really important that we have spaces within our communities that will help us to be able to have somewhere to put that kind of grief, which is why it was important to me that this also included people within the communities who were already talking about narratives of grief, or people who were already dealing with grief inadvertently, because grief is something that is just so pervasive. It's in so many parts of our lives. There are so many different forms of grief, and myself, even in my own experience, I learned about this experience of grief through doing this project. It was a way for me to be able to filter this communal or disenfranchised grief that I was experiencing from just not knowing what to do whenever we hear about like a queer person going missing or something
Well,
happening.
Amaryllis, I don't want you to give away too much
Oh,
of
I'm
Vesta
so
Key, because
sorry.
no, don't worry about it. It's fine. You're good. But I don't want you to give away too much, because we're actually going to pull up the archive, and I want you to talk about it while we can actually see it, so that we can
Oh,
have a
absolutely.
sense of how that works. So thank you so much for sharing that. I want to go to Rain and ask him to introduce himself, tell us where he's from, where he's currently located. I know you're a international man of mystery and
Yeah,
talent. So just introduce yourself to us.
of course. Hello, my name is Rain Hansen. I'm from Kingston, Jamaica. I'm an artist and filmmaker based between Kingston and Los Angeles, California. I would say my practice is really driven by experimentation. I make moving image work that lives between the film world and the fine art world. And I would like to continue for it to not be confined to any one of those avenues. And definitely very inspired by just the Caribbean, Jamaica, Black queer people, my community. Um, and yeah,
Thanks. And tell us about your work in Reimagining and how that actually responds to our approach to reimagining liberated queer futures.
yes. So I have some photos and a film in the exhibit that really were born from just my fear of the climate crisis, and I think I, for the sake of my own well peace of mind, had to transmute that fear into like, okay, how can I, like, instead of being afraid of like people like me being like the first to experience the brunt of the climate crisis, what if we were actually the people who were most equipped to adapt? Specifically speaking about Black trans people and how we have to attune to our bodies and needs, and just in general kind of create our own being um, to better fit our environment. And so the project basically imagines, it's almost like a near future climate apocalyptic tale in which after
Okay, don't give away too much. Don't give away
okay,
too
sorry,
much. We're going to show a little bit of it. We're going to
okay,
show a little bit of it. So let's just keep that sneak peek
okay.
before we get into the meat of the matter. And I want to move swiftly to Neela Ebanks. Neela, just tell us a little bit about yourself. Where are you from? Where are you located? Your creative practice generally, and your work in Reimagine, and how that responds to liberated queer futures.
Why, Carrie, if I could tell you, hi, it's good to be here. If I could tell you where I was from, like really from, I would give myself an award. But for now, I am from Kingston, Jamaica, and I work in Kingston, Jamaica. I work primarily as a movement artist, dance artist, choreographer, and writer sometimes. The truth is, I try to choreograph everything. So my approach to everything is choreographical. My approach to everything is how can I make something move? In terms of the work for Reimagine, it stemmed from something I drew, and I wanted to figure out how can I make that move? How can I make that untethered? How can I make that undulate? Because that's the kind of future I want for us queer people, to be able to move, to be untethered, to be free, to undulate just like the waters of the Caribbean Sea and of the ocean. And so I attempted with my co-conspirator, Nadija Deacon, who provided the soundscape, I attempted to imagine us as waves, imagine us as pixel dust. I attempted to choreograph a drawing into movement.
Oh, wow, that's really beautiful, and I can't wait for us to see it. Thank you so much, Neela. And
Sure.
now, last but not least, Barbara Caridad. I'm just going to ask you to introduce yourself, tell us where you're from, where you're located now, your work generally, and your work in the exhibition, and how does that reimagine liberated queer futures?
Yeah, thank you, Carrie. Really honored to be here with y'all. Barbara Caridad. I am from Miami, Florida, more specifically for those who know Hialeah, Florida. Also a dancer, primarily a dancer, moving, performing artist. Recently got into filmmaking, and that's actually the piece that is in the exhibition, Gosa. It's a dance film. And a lot of my work is rooted first and foremost in movement in the body, and in all that the body stores and all that we have access to in our bodies, primarily like when thinking about our ancestors, and very much also rooted in Black feminist queer politic. And Gosa was my way of exploring joy and dance and movement as inheritance, but also tools of resistance, and joy as a clarifying tool for, like Rain said, attuning ourselves to our bodies, and yeah, being very clear about what feels good and what doesn't.
And how does GOSA respond to new approaches to reimagining liberated queer futures?
Yeah, a lot of Gosa was thinking about what I have access to, like right now, to really shift and transform my reality and the reality of my loved ones, and trying to practice generating and sustaining joy, and letting that lead the way for what it is that we will and will not accept in our lives. And, hopefully that carrying on towards building and imagining radical, liberated futures rooted in pleasure.
Thank you. Thank you so much for that, Barbara. We're going to get to watch a bit of your film in a few. Thank you so much for that. I want to actually go in detail with Amaryllis's work, Vesta Key, Digital Archive. And I'd like for us to look at some installation shots of Vesta Key within Reimagine, because effectively Vesta Key became a site within which other works could actually exist as well, Amaryllis. And I think that this is one of the beauty of, having I don't call it a group show. I think it's a community expression where it's interesting because, you conceptualize Vesta Key to operate and to live in a virtual space, but we have it installed in a physical way, and we've overlaid particular pieces onto that kind of work. And I think if you I'm waiting for these installation shots to come up, but what I want to share is that as you can see it, so we have, so if you're looking at this, it is to the left of the screen, and there are two maps. So there is a map of Jamaica on the left, and there is a map of Vesta Key on the right. That's a bit out of the frame. And then there is a central image. Yeah, so that's the map of Jamaica that shows exactly where Vesta Key would be located. And then to the right of that, we have a map of Vesta Key, and overlaid onto these maps are two images that we're looking at right now, by Jadiel, another Jamaican artist who is effectively reimagining how queer individuals can function in this space, Jamaica. And we also have Rain with these submerged images that is onto Vesta Key as well. And what's not in this frame right now, but I believe, Khalib, that there's a photo of it that we'll see later, is Plaid Puma's reimagined coat of arms called Our Arms. And so effectively, Amaryllis, Vesta Key has become a site within which these other reimaginations of what queer life could look like, what a coat of arms could look like, that's kind of grounding this particular reality. Like Vesta Key now becomes that space. How do you feel about this?
Yeah, actually, first of all, I want to say shout out to Jadiel and Rain. I feel like their work complements it very well. And I remember seeing the size of the installation, and I initially imagined that it would be installed in some way. I never imagined it would be that scale. And I was saying the other day that I'm really glad I spent all the time putting those tiny details into it, because then it got blown up. And if there were any imperfections that I didn't really care to take care of at the time, then we would have all known that. But I was so happy to see that these works could like be juxtaposed in that way, because I feel like that's the importance of acknowledging queer grief, so that you can make space for more joyous queer realities, and so that you can be able to have space to experience life and thrive, because we do have thriving queer communities within the Caribbean. And I feel like it's really important in undoing the narrative that the Caribbean is the most dangerous place in the world for queer people, is to show that we do have these experiences. Like, we're caring for each other, like we're living lives together, like we're experiencing everyday life just like everybody else out there. So I felt like this was a great example of that. And I felt like it really brings the work to life. And yeah, I definitely feel like they go really well together. And I appreciate seeing that this is something that can exist within a narrative that includes other perspectives, because I feel like it's important that these pieces are in conversation with each other.
Thank you for that. I'd love to bring Rain into the conversation now, because Rain, some of your pieces, your photographs are also superimposed on one of the maps of Vesta Key. And I want to know, how do you feel about this particular juxtaposition that Vesta Key makes space? Do you feel that it actually creates that world? So these are other artists, other queer folks who've been submerged, according to your titles, and they're submerged within this oceanic space of Vesta Key that Amaryllis has conjured up, to hold queer grief, to hold queer stories, to hold queer narratives. How do you feel about having your work being in direct conversation with this?
Yeah, I think it works so well. I love how they converse together. And when I first thought of like where it takes place, in my mind it's like somewhere in the Caribbean. Like, it's not really specified. And so I didn't know about Vesiki, or like those other, I don't islands that are sprinkled down the Caribbean, but it was nice to like have a exact place that just like works so well, where I was already thinking about it. And so it really helped to like ground it and make it feel like connected to just, I think, what's inherent to the project, which is collective dreaming. So the fact that Amaryllis is dreaming about this, and that our dreams could coincide, I think is really beautiful.
And I think one of the things that this brings up for me, Amaryllis, is that as you are reimagining a physical space that can hold queer experience, it actually is not in the West. So it's not, it's not in America, it's not in Canada, it's not in Europe. It literally exists right off the shore of Jamaica, which technically is still Jamaican waters, right? So it still is Jamaica. And I think for me, that's one of the things that was very interesting. And Rain, you're just saying too that you're happy that your queer submergence could actually take place like within Jamaican shores as well, So is that a thing for you that as we reimagine our futures or liberated queer futures, that it actually doesn't have to be separate from Jamaica?
It's actually really important to me. It was important to me that this place was near Jamaica and off the coast. And I'd love to qualify that Vesta Key does not exist in this current reality. Vesta Key is a critically fabulated island that is made off of the coast of Jamaica because it is existing with Jamaica and it's existing in tandem with Jamaica, and it is something that is just a manifestation of the queer experiences and the grief that we all have to put into somewhere. And it was important to me that it was put off of the coast of there because I didn't want to center anywhere that wasn't this land, that wasn't the land that we already had connection to. And I feel like a lot of the times when we think about things like homonationalism, we think that the fantastical idea for queer people, for people to thrive, is like somewhere in the global north or somewhere in America or somewhere that they feel like queerness is somehow taken a little lighter or easier. I felt like it was really important that Vesta Key existed on those coastlines in the Caribbean Sea because the sea is such a source of
History,
diversity for queer people and people from the Caribbean.
I like that. I really like that. Sorry, Rain.
I actually thought there's actually an island, a very small island in between Jamaica and Haiti. And I thought that was what it was. I just didn't have a name. So in my mind, I was already putting it right there. So that's funny. But yeah.
I want to bring Neela into the conversation now, Neela, because generally, as you've said, I know you to do a lot of choreography, and I'm curious to place anyway within the choreography of reimagining, and as you stated, you are really trying to untether, like you're using this to sort of like untether, and so I kind of want to bring pull this into the conversation now, because so your work exists really as digital media, but it is situated within an exhibition where we've had Amaryllis build out this physical this actual space, Vesta Key, that is situated offshore. For you, like when you talk about anyway, does that anyway also lead us back to the Jamaican waters?
Of course, and I think particularly with the sound score I got from Nadija and the ancestors, all of the various ones, it is one that is located in the use of patois and the use of some Yoruba words. Yeah, in the blurb I call it Yoruba sonic power of these concepts. But it is also located, I would almost say, within us. The everywhere is every single where, meaning a large everywhere or an internal everywhere, a cellular everywhere, an ethereal everywhere, because my dream is to just be able to exist as the atoms that we are, to not be repressed, to not be oppressed, to not have boundaries, to not have borders, to not have to prove anything, to really be untethered. And so it can be located anywhere and everywhere that we need to be.
I like that. Kelly, are we able to get any film footage? It'd be great if we could share 30 seconds of anyway at this point.
What I could show you was where it started, which is because, as I say, I'm a movement artist, but sometimes I do things with pen. And so I started in 2020. I was just drawing these two luscious, lovely figures who were just dancing with each other with these vibrating, pockets of air around them. And so I said, how can I make them move? Which is kind of like what I think about ourselves. How can we just move? How can we get ourselves to move? People think we're fixed. They think we're fixed into what they have put us into. How can we move out of that? Sometimes to do that, you have to, as some people do, you have to demolecularize and sort of spread yourself out. Sometimes you have to make yourself small, unfortunately. Sometimes you have to do all sorts of things, but how are the ways in which we can untether from what people think we're supposed to be? Because what they think we're supposed to be, what they think they're supposed to be, but we don't subscribe to that. And for me, that is also a part of trying to find the joy, as Barbara said, the clarifying tool of joy.
And I like that we're about to move into Barbara. And before we go to Barbara, because Barbara is also a performance artist and is now also leveraging the modality of film, I'm curious to know how it is that you challenge audiences to sort of like move into participation, because I suppose that's also, you know, a function of movement and performance. But now you're leveraging the modality of film. And I'm curious to know, and this is something I'd love for us to all talk about a bit later, that how does, you know, moving this particular expression into film, how do you find that that actually like pushes further into reimagining, pushes further into participation?
I think what it does, it gives people permission, particularly this kind where I'm experimenting with, you know, these sort of animating possibilities. It pushes you into seeing yourself not even humanoid, you know what I mean? So then the possibilities start to become even more expanded. So there's a certain kind of participation, psychologically, emotionally, but then also I'm learning now about, you know, the visual arts world and installations and scale. And for me, I think my dream way of doing it would be as large as possible or as multiple as possible in a black box, kind of like a theater, so that you are surrounded by, and it's dark enough for you to be able to feel safe enough to consider the liberation for yourself.
So immersive.
Yeah.
Okay. And I want us to hold on to that word. We're going to come back to it, but I want to move into Barbara and bring her into the conversation. And Khalib, again, if we can get to see the first 30 seconds of Goza as we chat with Barbara about Goza specifically. You know, again, and similar to Neela, Barbara, you've chosen to actually leverage the modality of film in reimagining queer futures and in sharing that in community. And I'm curious to know, you know, what exactly are you hoping to achieve there? How are you getting audiences to participate via that modality as opposed to performance, which is where you've been located? So Khalib, if we can see maybe the first 30 seconds of Goza, but Barbara, feel free to share as Khalib works to pull that out.
Yeah, no, I think a lot about this question, and I think it's something that I'm still figuring out. I think it's a skill definitely as an artist that I need to refine, like what is the call to action essentially. But I think that something that's really magical about the power of like film and its relationship with dance and movement is, I think at least the dance and performance that I have participated in like my whole life and that I've been witness to, a lot of it that's Western and white and colonized, is ephemeral in a way that escapes you. Sometimes it doesn't even, nothing actually like settles. You don't understand what's happening. It's kind of arrogant in a way. And I think that film allows for the dance to exist in this realm, but to also like hold hands with language and poetry and word and sound in a way that makes it an actual world, in a way that dance on stage sometimes has a hard time achieving. Yeah, I don't know if I answered your question.
No, yeah, I think you did. I think you did. I actually want us to have a general discussion now because for me, it's quite interesting that all your works leverage digital media, like it lives in this particular kind of modality. And it makes me think a lot about archives, you know, about archiving and how it is that we can leverage technology to one, document and have that serve as archive, and then also have that generate a much further reach. And so I'm curious for us to kind of explore, you know, considering digital media as sort of like querying of the archival process and putting that into sort of like a juxtaposition with, traditional archives and how that often exclude queer narratives. So, I'm curious to understand if like this is very intentional, sort of like querying this process of documenting and archiving. Neela, I think I want to ask you to respond to that one first, and we can, just all have this general conversation about that.
I think I completely agree with you in terms of this media gives you more possibilities. I mean, I'm speaking particularly as a movement artist, and you have the ability to go beyond what a body can do. You have the ability to bend and stretch and fold and form. And when you are able to fix that into something that is digital media and that can live on, that is a form of queering the entire idea about dance, because the truth is it's ephemeral. You blink, you miss it, and it's done. But if we are also able to not just fix dance, but fix our dance or fix our bodies in any ways, we can stretch them, we can make them longer, we can double them up, we can re-choreograph things, we can do things that are not 3D possible, but certainly multidimensionally possible. And if we are multidimensional as queer people are, then yeah, it's a way of queering archive, I think. And also queering and expanding what disciplines have seen themselves to be.
I agree. Khalib, if it's possible to pull up When the Oyster Becomes Your World by Rain, I'd love for us to actually look at the first 30 seconds of that. And Rain, I remember at the opening, you were talking about how this particular project introduced new technology. And so you were able to use projectors that you had not necessarily used before in creating this particular universe. And so I'd love for you to also weigh in on this as well as somebody who's also worked in film, just leveraging the media to add to what can be documented, what can be speculated, what can be conjured and considered to exist within the realm of queer archives.
Yeah, so we used what's called like a VR stage. So we were in like, instead of it just being like a 2D projection, it was like the entire like 3 wall setup was projected. And it's funny hearing like people who are primarily coming from movement backgrounds speak about film, because for me, why I was drawn toward movement to tell this story was, for one, it takes place underwater. So it's like, okay, how can people communicate without words? Because obviously we can't talk underwater, at least not yet. And so using movement as the language for that, and also using sound as well as a way to like engage audiences, and like you're talking about making immersive and interactive. And I think yeah, I air towards like very layered surreal soundscapes, and I think that by having sound and music that activates people's subconscious can really, I feel like allow them to be engaging in your work in a way that they might not have before, especially when people are can't when you hear dialogue, you can kind of just passively listen, but when you have to watch and actually look at people's bodies and really like find another way to access it, I think also helps to really just have it almost be like a cyclical like experience of the film. And I kind of forgot your original question, but
That's okay, because I want to ask no, and this is for you, Neela and Barbara, you don't all have to answer, but I'm curious to know, do you see your films as like time capsules for future queer audiences? And then what do you hope that they'll recover from them decades from now? It's like, when we think about liberation and moving forward, and, it's hard to think about that without also thinking about, the principle of Sankofa. And so, you're thinking about everything that we're doing now as being part of, the liberation journey. And so, I'm thinking, if we were living in the 90s and these films existed as VHS tapes, that, future queer people would walk into a thrift shop and be able to unbox in the future? What exactly, would you hope that they would get from this as a sort of like praxis of liberation?
I think I think it just came to me a while ago because in making space, it was really so intuitive. I was writing things, concepts were coming, but it just needed to be made. And I'm really realizing more and more it was a spell that was being crafted, and a ritual that was being performed. And so anytime it is done in archive, anytime it is done in real life, anytime it is played, it is my hope and our hope, Nadija and I, that the spell is cast again. And that so more than being a time capsule, maybe like a time release capsule. You have those that them kind of like medicine. So every some hours it's supposed to give you some more, maybe something like that. So that no matter where it lands in a linear timeline, it's past, present, future. And so every time you play it, it does something to the ether. The spell is recast, re-strengthened, and the medicine is given, because it was a lot of medicine for us as well in the doing of it. I hope that answers it, but it really just came to me a while ago. I think that's it.
Yes, it's answered this, and I wrote that down because I think we need to include this as we produce future captions for the exhibition, that it was a spell that was being casted. Like, that's just so beautiful. I actually want to briefly go through Vesta Key for those of us who haven't had a chance to see that. And so, Khalib, if possible, could you pull up that live website for us? Because I was taking note when you were introducing yourselves, each of you, and kind of noting some of what you've mentioned as the motivating factors behind the works that have been submitted for the exhibition. So, Amaryllis, you talked about grief, like like a landing page or a landing space for grief, somewhere to hold that grief. I heard Rain talking about just releasing some of this fear. Neela, you talked about being untethered. Barbara, you talked about joy. And I think that what's interesting is that a lot of times we want to arrive at freedom, and we want to arrive at the liberation without doing some of the shadow work and like getting through some of these things. And I find that what you've built here, Amaryllis, I think is incredibly necessary as a space, like a digital space, but a space that can hold some of this grief. And interestingly, it's infinite in its ability to do this, considering that it's living digitally, right? And I think that as we continue to reimagine futures, again, like thinking of Sankofa, like what are some of the things though that we have not yet actually unpacked, like a lot of the grief, a lot of the fear, and actually putting that somewhere so that as we move forward, we are lighter. And so I think that Vestaki does this so well. And I'd love for us to just be able to look at what you've built here, and just to briefly look at some of the spaces that are holding some of this grief for all of us. So, Khalib, I saw it briefly. Not sure if it's just me who's not seeing it again on screen, but if we could have it come up. And if it isn't going to come up, I think, Amaryllis, what I would love for you to share with us are some of the spaces that exist on the site itself. So I know that, for example, you do have a page where you've included actual stories from the Gleaner and other media houses that are reporting on incidents that include queer people. I know that there's also a space for people to write, to actually put their own stories forward. And so that was really what I wanted us to kind of observe, like how you are holding space, how Vestaki isn't only a reimagination of a space that could hold us in the future, but how can it hold some of this weight right now?
First of all, thank you. Secondly, I want to go back to what Neela said about creating the medicine of your own on your own. And I want you to know that that's a very brilliant statement. I really appreciate you saying that, because I find that within organizing spaces, community spaces, because I've been participating in community spaces and organizing spaces since about 2017. And I've found that a lot of the times we scramble to try to fix things for other people before we even do anything for ourselves, or we feel like helping other people will help us. And in some situations, that's true. And I feel like that's the truth for a lot of artists who want to be able to have a way to filter out the experiences that we have, but we just don't have anywhere to put it. So we make it into something. So Anila said that, I definitely felt it. I really appreciated hearing that from you. And secondly, I felt like it was really important that this space offered some kind of reprieve. Actually, Vestaki will be taking like entries throughout the next few years whenever people want to submit like a story or an experience or an imagined event that would happen for somebody that they miss. They can submit that, and then that can be put into the map. And the
Just a quick
collaborative essay.
question, Amaryllis. Is this exclusive for Jamaicans or is this anyone?
This specific project is for queer Jamaican grief, but the programming we usually offer is for queer Jamaicans priority and queer people from the Caribbean and within the Caribbean diaspora. Because last year in November, we held about 9 workshops, which is inclusive of like a month-long reading group. And I met so many people, so many queer people from across the Caribbean and from across the country who were really interested in having somewhere to speak about these things. Like people just don't have anywhere to do this because you can't just tell people to go to therapy because one, therapy is expensive, and two, maybe that's not the modality that works for everybody. Everybody has like a method that works for them. And I found that these spaces where you could come and sit down and talk about like a grieving experience that you're having or had, or a space for you to maybe, I don't know, like safely intellectualize like the experiences that you've had. It's really important for people to have like outlets for them to be able to put their grief. And that's one of the methods for the collaborative essay as well, because the collaborative essay is experimental and it includes writing from, well, right on the screen right now, that's Justine Marie. And Justine is the person who wrote the poem at the top of the essay. It's like a prologue to the essay, and halfway through it's transition into the other sections of the essay as we're talking about queer futures and queer grief. There is a story from Kodian, which is like a beautiful story, a beautiful account of a fictionalized experience of queer grief, of somebody losing a friend. And this story was also an outlet for a grief of a different kind. It's just a way for people to be able to put the experiences that we have that are really not supposed to be living in our bodies into a space where we can like have that be transmuted into something that's beautiful, and that we can have for each other to know that we see each other and that we can be able to hold each other while we are going through these things. Because at the end of the day, you don't really just deal with these things on your own. So that's why it's important that collaboratively we could get together and like create somewhere to put that. And
I like that. I like that you said it's
mhm.
Amaryllis, and I wanna pause for a second to bring Barbara into the conversation because there's something that you said that really stood out to me, which is these things really, and by these things we're talking about the grief, the fear, that they're not really meant to live in our bodies. And Barbara, I want to bring you into the conversation at this point, as you know, a performing artist, but also as as one of the members, well, the member of this panel who's based in Florida in a different environment. And I want to bring you into the conversation at this point to share with us how it is that this resonates with you and your specific community there. Assuming it does have its own nuances and needs and you know, set of experiences that's very different from what maintains in Jamaica. Or if not, just share with us how it is that you find that this relates to you, your community, and the work that you're trying to do with performing arts and also the modality of film.
Absolutely, thank you. The thing that kept popping up while listening to Amaryllis speak is like the transmutation of the grief, of this pain, of these things that store themselves in our bodies in ways that make us sick, eventually psycho-spiritually, physically, and the power of dance to and movement, and like dance beyond like, you know, 5, 6, 7, 8, but like really finding groove, seeing the way that that pleasure and the groove manifests in your body and where it manifests in your body. And I think to say that in Miami, there are a lot of things going on in my mind, but I find that like the church is literally getting together and dancing and throwing it back and releasing it, because otherwise it will swallow us whole. And yeah.
Rain, I want to bring you into the conversation as well, because you are between two coasts. And I think sometimes it's easy to think that what's happening in our own environments is isolated, that it's unique to us here. I'm curious to know, and especially since you're working in the film industry, what's your experience like in LA? Just briefly, just share with us what you're experiencing there.
That's a huge question. If you mean specifically in terms of like the queer community here, I think it is very like alive, but I will say I feel that aliveness in almost every place I go to. I don't know if it's like the time we're in, our generation, I don't know what it is, but I feel like it's definitely very motivated by like joy. Like Barbara's saying, most of the times we gather is for like some kind of celebration, party, dance, but also I've been noticing, especially since the pandemic and since obviously like Trump's re-election, that people are trying to find ways to commune outside of nightlife, which I think is really, really important, because at the end of the day, like obviously, that will heal us, but I don't know if it will save us in terms of dismantling any of the larger systems. And so I think that's something I'm trying to seek out, even for myself, how to like, connect with people beyond just us having a good time when we go out. And whether that's like book clubs, picnics, screenings, workshops, skill sharing, whatever type of thing like that.
Just
So
being in real community. I
yeah,
think we only have a few minutes, but what I was really trying to get from you just very quickly is in the ways that there is a sense that there are things that we're holding in our bodies, as Jamaicans, as queer people who've had to live just like within societies that, suppress aspects of our identities, like in the ways in which we feel like things are in our bodies that we need to release and we need to find a place to put that. Do you see that? And Barbara, for you too, like, is this also the experience in Miami? Is this also the experience with the queer community in LA? Do we have more in common in terms of the ways that we need to be liberated than we think?
definitely. I would say definitely. Like it's funny because it's different, but it's also not different at the same time in terms of like, I don't know. I feel like maybe we're just, I don't know, people here are maybe like, there's more, I don't want to say like space or boldness to like be who you are, but I think maybe the religious domination of Christianity in Jamaica specifically, I don't know, I don't really know what it is that makes it a little bit less open, but I feel the visibility and the like presence of queer people strongly in both places in a way that, especially like now, like as I'm sure you guys know too, being in Kingston, like there's just so much more at the community center. Like I definitely think it's a lot more similar than we think, and a lot of the struggles are similar, and there's so much power in recognizing the sameness. So
Thanks for that. And so as we're wrapping up, there are two questions I want to ask, but I think I'm gonna ask each of you different questions. So Neil, I want to start with you, and I think that I want to ask you that if your creative work, not just this, work that you have here in Reimagine, but if your creative work could time travel, what message would you want it to carry to future core generations?
And you see me now, especially now, I'm not thinking linearly anymore. So it wouldn't time travel forward, or it would time travel out. But the message would be, shake that thing off. Do the thing that you know in your soul. Be the person, be the flower that you are, be the color that you are, because all the other things are going to be dismantled anyway. They're all false, particularly in the Caribbean, where we've been, enculturated into this way of repressing our own selves. Yeah, just follow that seed inside, and we'll lead everybody where they need to go anyway. So, yeah.
Thanks. And Amaryllis, I'd love for you to answer that same question to 30 seconds. If your art could time travel, if Vesta Key could time travel, what message would you want it to carry to queer generations? And I'm going to bar Neela, it doesn't have to be in the future, but just, in the vibrations, in the ether, what would you want Vesta Key to convey?
Well,
30
yeah,
seconds.
it's actually Vesta Key's intention to time travel. Vesta Key is reconciling with the past and with the present and the future all at once, because it's important that this is something that we can continue doing going into the future. It would be great if I'd go to the future and tell them to grieve, like actually really experience this thing around people who can be there with you. I'd tell them to shake their bodies real hard. I'd tell them to cry in front of each other, because crying in front of people should not be something that's taboo. I'd tell them that whatever you do, just don't bottle it up. Don't keep it in you, because that's how you end up like dying before you can actually die.
Wow, I love that. And Neela, I saw you shaking your head with the shake your body. And I want to ask Rain and Barbara, if your work could manifest one concrete change in the real world, what would it be? 30 seconds.
I could take it off if you want, right?
Please.
I also a beautiful and challenging question, but I think right now I would really want my work to help continue shifting cultural perceptions of like us as Black queer people, as people living in the West and colonized like states and countries, but really shifting our perception of culture and offering that ability to look into the future and see a reality that is dignified, that is liberated and safe for us.
Thank you so much, Rain.
Yeah, I think honestly, just a reprioritization of the land and tending to the land, connecting to the land, the earth. I think, like I said, the climate crisis is always on my spirit, and especially being from the Caribbean, I'm always afraid. Like, what if there's one day no Jamaica to go back to? Like, I can't just. I think if somehow the work I make could inspire people to like just really think about, have the change of like towards sustainability for all living things, I think that is top of mind right now for sure.
Thank you so much. And with that, we are at the end of our conversation. It was so great being in conversation with you all. It's really been an honor to hold your works. Thank you for submitting. Thank you for being a part of Reimagine, Liberating Queer Futures. And I want to say that the reception has been just overwhelmingly positive. Like people really appreciate that you guys exist, that you took the step of submitting your works, and that the works exist to actually offer collective healing and to offer us an approach to have these liberated queer futures. And so I want to thank again the Art Woman and Blink and the Island Space Caribbean Museum. Thank you, Khalib, for producing our talk and for helping us in all the ways in all the big and small ways that you have behind the scenes. And I want to also remind everyone that the exhibition is still up at the Island Space Caribbean Museum until the 11th of May. And we'd also love to see everyone at the closing on the 8th. And so continue to, and I think one of the things that this has also inspired me to advocate for is that we continue to be in communities with each other. So I hope everybody follows each other's work. So whether that is that you follow each other on Instagram, that you can continue to be in community, that we support Amaryllis's project, that we support each other's project, that we follow the Our Woman, that we follow Blink, that we follow the Island Space Caribbean Museum, and that we continue to be allies in our collective reimagining of liberated queer futures. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you.